So tonight for homework, you are going to do the big digital print. This is a bit different than our previous homeworks, and it is actually our last homework that is a complete project in itself. The rest of the homeworks, the rest of class, are all working towards your final projects. Okay, so this is your last week of making a mood board and a pattern in the same week. So tonight for homework, you are going to have your mood board, you are going to have your big digital prints, and you are going to put your pattern on a photograph. So that's called texture mapping. And we are going to learn how to texture map today, and we're also going to do it as an in-class activity. The big digital prints, there is no limit for color. You can use millions of colors in this. It can be literally photographic, okay? And there's no need to make other colorways. You are just doing the big digital print. And you, what else? Okay, so it does need to be 36 inches by 40 inches, and it says you should be at 600 pixels per inch, but I think 300 pixels per inch is probably fine. I'll try to edit that so it won't get confusing. And your mood board does not need a palette because this assignment doesn't have, that limited palette that we've been working with from the last assignments. Like my example from last class where I made a textural pattern from in Photoshop from that little, that's not the example, but from that little texture image that I had, that had millions of colors in it, or thousands, and that is definitely an option. So you have a couple ways, a couple options for making this pattern, and I want to talk about them, but first I want to talk about engineered prints. This project is supposed to be an opportunity for you to experiment with engineered prints. Does anyone remember what an engineered print is? Way back from my first lecture. An engineered print is a print that is meant to be put on a specific part of the garment. So it is engineered or designed to fit on a specific part of the garment. And it can be shown when we apply it, when we texture map it onto the garment, how you would like it to fit on there. So this is the reason why we have to put our big digital prints into repeat, even though the whole repeat would never show up on a garment, right? If your print is 36 inches wide by 40 inches tall, that's pretty much bigger than most garments you're going to come across. So you would never technically see the whole repeats on a garment, but it still needs to be put into a repeat because it has to be printed, right? So in an industrial setting, you would print this fabric in yardage, and then these pattern pieces would be cut out of the fabric, okay? So it still has to be seamless and be able to be in yardage, but it's just going to be, quite large. But it still does have to be in repeat, okay? And like our 24-inch prints in the floral project, this was made 24 inches wide, and we are still going to show it at 100% scale, okay? So this hasn't been scaled down at all. And even though it's being clipped off by the edges of the paper, on the second page, even though we don't have colorways, we are going to, actually I can do it this way. we are going to still show this pattern just at a small scale and also not messed up. Right, so it would be more like this, where the second page, anyway, the second page would be small scale, but it wouldn't be different colorways. Like this example that I made in the last class, although I hate this print that I made. It was designed on something that was 36 inches wide and 40 inches tall. And I've shown it at 100% scale, so this cat is being cut off. And then I've also shown it shrunk down. So I added a lot more to it than since I did that. So, that's an engineered pattern. Let's look at this PowerPoint. And these are also going to be engineered patterns. So it's not necessarily required that you think about like what part of each garment is going to go on which part of the pattern, like they have in this. But it would be nice to just think about the body as a whole when you're designing, right? So normally we've been designing like pretty small patterns that you could imagine, being displayed in a repeat across a shirt or a garment. But for this, the pattern is going to be the garment, right? It's going to make up the whole garment. So let's look at some of these examples. Let's get into present mode here. This is a digitally printed example that in the background has these like two different patterns, right? There's like two different plaids or checks here. But then overlaid on top of that, there are these peonies, which are essentially photographs of peonies that they've cut out, right? So that's how this is able to be so clear, is that this was digitally printed, right? Even though this fabric that like makes up the majority of this fabric would not need to be digitally printed, because like this is only black and white, and this is only like blue and pink. These guys need to be digitally printed. Is everyone clear on what I mean when I say digital printing and the difference between digital printing and like screen printing or roller printing, right? So with screen printing, we have a limited number of colors, right? Because the paint has to be passed through each screen, where with digital printing, things are literally just being printed out as if like from an inkjet printer, a big inkjet printer, okay? So these printers can print in millions of colors, and there's no longer any of the limitations of like dragging the paint through the screen or placing the paint onto the roller to get on there. It's just, just like a normal printer. So you can have photorealistic peonies on your pattern if you want to. This one is super interesting because this pattern definitely could have been made with like a normal repeat and then, trim or something, but we can tell that this garment is actually a digital print, because right here and like this moment right here, these roses are actually going out over the trim, which is making such a subtle but interesting effect, like playing with the 3 dimensions of this like flat pattern. So that is an interesting example of how they can kind of use probably yardage in order to make this dress, right? With something like this, you would probably have to have like the pattern of the garment already and then design for inside the pattern, which is something that we would more do if we were learning like CAD for pattern drafting or something like that. But you can get, you could do something similar to this by having different sections of the patterns that were dedicated to different sections of the garment. So this one's super simple. It's just got like 2 different sections to the pattern, which could be interesting. More from them. This is not a particularly like over-engineered print. This might just be a repeat that is in, you know, that they've just cut up like a normal repeat, but it is really large scale. And maybe making it super engineered to the body isn't something that's super interesting to you. And I think that, you know, making a normal pattern would be fine. Although I think it's more interesting when you think about how it fits on the body, like in Moschino's paper doll collection that we've looked at a couple times here. There's more later, but they really play with that idea of like what's flat and like where things fit on the body. So I really love this one. I've looked into it and I found a picture of the back of this garment too, and this woman is repeated on the back. So this is actually yardage of like a giant scale fabric that they've bought, right? So if we thought about this fabric in yardage, in repeats, every few feet on this yardage of fabric, there would be a giant face, right? So it would be like giant face, giant face, giant face. And then like in between it, they've filled in with like all of these berries and these other artworks, okay? Here's more of Moschino's paper doll. And these have belts and pearls on them that are printed on, okay? So those aren't like put on after. They play with flatness in their jewelry and accessories in this collection too, but it is a great example of engineered prints. So we have some more and some more even here. And actually even these pleats on this skirt are printed on. So like none of that detail is actually there. It's all super flat. These buttons are printed on. I honestly, maybe like this cardigan might be printed on. It's a little hard to tell though. She's got an extra hand coming out, so they've played with weird moments like this in this one, and in this one they've like actually, you know, put parts of her body back onto the dress. Super interesting stuff here. So McQueen here has taken an MC Escher print and made it into a repeating pattern. I think this is really cool how it gets from like a really tight texture to a really loose texture at the bottom of the garment. And I think that that is actually something that could be really accomplishable by you guys if you just like make all of your motifs a lot smaller at the top and a lot bigger at the bottom. When we apply that to the garments, that'll have such a unique effect. I would say, though, that you guys should definitely be trying to use your own artwork and your own photographs to make this project. It's just way healthier and way better if you do use your own photographs when you're making the pattern. When we're doing the texture mapping, you can choose any image off of Google. But for making the pattern, today I'm going to work from my original artwork or from, well, I don't want to do that same photograph again, and my photo account isn't letting me log in, so I will be using something from the internet, but I would have liked to use my own artwork. So I think this is so cool, and I think that these are also super modern, right? In the 90s or before, you would never have seen digital prints used at this scale, right? Digital prints might have been available even in the 90s, but it would be more like someone printed it out on their inkjet printer and then like transferred it to fabric with like a heat press or something like that. Where we can print yardage of digitally printed fabric feels very new, and these garments seem like just so modern because of it. It's just not something that you would be able to see at any other period of time, right? This level of detail, where these garments actually look like they are made of jewels. Same for this, like this level of detail, even without all of the colors in it, like the detail and the tiny lines in all of the wings might have been honestly hard to recreate. Even if you were doing those lines with a screen, the screen could get clogged when you would try to print those lines. Okay, so like the level of detail you can put into these is just much bigger, and you wouldn't ever run into any kind of physical problem with printing them. You can print whatever. I don't know, this is symmetrical. It's clearly a giant print, but I don't think it's particularly interesting. This is a photograph of a bouquet that they've put on here, and I think it's fascinating how it looks like she's wearing like a giant bouquet, but it is digitally printed. These next few ones, at least these next two, are examples of digitally printing other fabric textures onto like a smooth texture fabric. So I think, it's hard to tell from this image, but I think that this is an image of a t-shirt that has had yarn, like chunky knit yarn, digitally printed onto it. So that's like a really interesting option. And then I think, because she included it, that this is not made of wool. I think that this is printed onto the garment so that it looks like the texture of wool without having that heavy weight that you would have to have in a fabric this texture. So it's just interesting to see how you can use digital prints to create different kind of illusions, really. A lot of the ones we've looked at have been, I don't know, very photorealistic, but you definitely are welcome to do something more artistic. I think this is a beautiful print. I love how there are birds kind of in different positions across it, and I think that that almost creates a narrative within it. It just feels very beautiful. I love its asymmetry. It's hard to tell in this photograph, but you could do color blocking with like different patterns in your repeat, right? This might have been digitally printed with these detailed areas and then with these like, and actually the way this is connected means that maybe it was digitally printed with the color blocking involved in the digital printing. So it might print yardage of these like shapes with these different textures in them. More Clover Canyon. I didn't know this, but I guess you can digitally print onto sequins. I had an Instagram ad that was like, we can digitally print onto sequins, and I was like, what? But I think that's what this image is of the undergarment is definitely just normally 3D printed fabric, but I think that this has been not 3D printed, digitally printed fabric. I think that this has been digitally printed onto sequins, and you can tell that there's like a lot of variety in these patterns with like the overlay textures they've put onto them and these different colors that don't seem to repeat as they go down the dress. So it's nice that you can kind of get that scale. Oh yeah, actually both of these are digitally printed, so where this looks super textural and this looks super structural, these are actually made of like close-up images of pencils. Super cute. I love her pencil cuff too over here. Stamps, I think we saw this image on the first day of class. More stamps, just really large scale pattern. This is the last one. So this is a really interesting example because you can kind of see right on her center, her center bust lines where the garment has been sewn together. So it's nice to kind of think of like the placement of the center of your pattern is going to be on the garment. They've decided to put this on a place where it isn't going to have any seams going through it because that would disrupt the pattern, right? So it should be in kind of a flat-ish area of the body if it's an important image. This must be the ready-to-wear version of this dress, where this one looks like it might be made of like a velvet and the typewriter fabric. This looks like the velvet has been digitally printed onto the fabric. And this isn't, it says it's Mary Catrant. So I wasn't sure who I thought it was, but it seems like there are two cute versions of it. Does that make sense, the engineered print? Okay, so it might be fun for you guys to experiment with that this week, and there are a couple different options for doing so. One is you can make a photorealistic pattern in Photoshop using the techniques I talked about last class, or you can use Illustrator to, you could just draw in Illustrator like we have been, or we can use Auto Trace to trace your original artwork. So I'm going to jump over to Illustrator. Something that might be nice if you are planning on doing an engineered design, if you really want it to fit to the body, it might be nice to find the garments that you're going to apply this print to before you start designing. It's not required by any means, but we are going to need a photograph in order to complete our homework of a white dress or some other like lighter colored, solid colored dress. And we want to make sure it's really large. And I just found out also, one of the students in the last class told me that if you go to settings and you choose advanced search, you can filter for images that are larger than a certain number of megapixels. So larger than 4 megapixels, and choosing advanced search again. These should all, so now these all have like 3,000 pixels or more, that's nice. So I knew you used to be able to do that, but I had lost where it was when Chrome updated, so it's just under advanced search. Okay, so let me I'll use this one. So I don't need to copy it right now, but I just want to keep this in mind. Maybe I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but maybe I want the top to be a kind of a different texture or different feeling than the bottom of the skirt. So last class I made like some of the worst patterns I've ever made as demos, so just don't get your hope, like I'm gonna do a really bad job, I think also. But I am going to work from some artwork that I was able to download, which is this gouache drawing of some, spooky stuff. I drew this when I was in the middle of a Sabrina the Teenage Witch binge back in the day. It's been a while since I drew this. Not the new cool Sabrina, the, old Disney Channel Sabrina. Much better. Very different, like almost uncomparable. I honestly love them both so much. So, there's probably a new season of the Scary Sabrina coming out soon, right? Yeah. It's spooky season. So, who here, the last class was unable to remember this. Let's see if you guys can beat them. Who remembers the difference between raster and vector? Yes?
Pixels versus, I don't know what's a word for it, but
Math.
Yeah, math. Pixels versus math.
Pixels versus math, exactly. So, right now, this is like a JPEG image that I saved somewhere. I like scanned it or photographed it or whatever. And what is it made of if it's a JPEG?
Pixels.
Yes, it's made of pixels, which are raster images. And what I am going to do in Photoshop is convert it to vectors. So once we convert it to vectors, what's the benefit going to be from converting this to vectors? Yes, you can resize it. You can resize it to any scale. If I scaled this up to, the 40 by 36 that we need in order to make our large scale pattern today, it would get blurry. So we are going to image trace it. Image trace, when you have a JPEG selected, image trace automatically shows up here, at least when you're in layout mode. Remember, Illustrator automatically opens up in Essentials, and there's no panel up here. And I don't know where Illustrator or where Auto Trace lives there. So I always work on layout, and that gives you this panel up here, the properties panel. So with it selected in the properties panel, you can just click image trace, but you can also click on this little caret, and it shows you all of these tracing presets. And I don't want, we can choose for it to be a low or high fidelity photo. And actually, if we did have like a picture of a, like a pug, we can, auto trace this, or image trace. I'm kind of using the wrong word. Image trace is what this function is called. We can image trace photographs, so I can choose, low or high fidelity photo. And now it's made of vectors, and we could scale this to any size now, and it should be able to scale just fine. The problem with using Illustrator for this to then make patterns out of it is that right now it is an image trace object, so it's not editable like normal yet. But if we hit expand, you'll see all of the vectors that this is made up of. So it's made up of hundreds and hundreds of vectors. So if we tried to define this as a pattern, I'll try it. It might break my computer, but it can't scare me. If we try to make this into a pattern and then like edit any of this, right? I don't know, move it. Sometimes my computer is working great, honestly, because I haven't been able to get it to slow down. But sometimes it will get kind of mad, and it will give you kind of a spinning wheel of death when you try to move in here, because each of these images and each of these like little sections is made up of hundreds of pixels, and then when it tries to repeat it 9 times, it's then doing, if this has 1,000 pixels or points in it, vectors, then it's repeating 9,000 points. So it can just really slow down your computer. So if you are going to use Photoshop and use image trace, it's just best if there's a couple ways around it that we're going to talk about, but it's kind of best if you at least make sure that your pattern is kind of done and correct before you bring it into pattern design mode, because pattern design mode in particular can make things run really slow. So let's get back to my artwork. I'm going to come up here to image trace, and instead of high or low fidelity photo, I'm going to choose 16 colors, and it's going to trace it. It's telling me it might take a long time, which auto trace can take a long time. Let's go pretty fast. We can then edit what it does with the image trace. So right now, it's just doing kind of like the standard setting that we chose for 16 colors, and it's using all of the standard settings. But we can get out the image trace panel, which lives under Window Image Trace. Or you can click on this little panel when you have an image trace image selected. You can click on this button and the image trace panel shows up. So with the image trace panel, yours might look like this, and you can open up the advanced tab. But before we get to the advanced tab, you have some options in here. So I'm going to uncheck preview, because otherwise if I make any changes on here, it will update and it will take a really long time again. So you really want to uncheck preview until you feel like you've changed everything that you would want to change. So I can choose from all these different presets. These are the same ones that we saw in that little drop-down menu when I chose that caret next to the image trace button. And these are all like, you know, just set up to work in certain ways. And then it breaks it down further here. So we could change, we don't really change the view because we want to see the tracing result. But you can change the mode to grayscale or black and white. You can change the palette to limited, which is what it's on, or full tone would be like a high resolution photo. And we can change the amount of colors. So if I zoom in here and actually we can change the view back to the source image. Is it going to? Oh, preview. This is the source image. And you can see all of the variation in the color of my brushstrokes. When we see the tracing results, you can see how limited it's made those colors. It has also vectorized them. So now it could be scaled to any size. So we can choose more or less colors in here. We could go all the way up to 30 colors on a limited palette, or if you wanted like the full tone, you could go even more. So let's check preview and see how 30 colors looks. Might not make much of a difference. And then I'll break into the advanced settings really quick. So it has more thinking to do because of all the more colors, and the more colors you use, it's also going to make more pixels. So this really didn't add this much to that section, but I did get like a little bit more shades of green. Really not too different. So let's stick with 16. I don't know if I can just do Command Z. Sorry, these take forever. And then we will go into the advanced tab. So what we're going to do after we like how it looks when it's auto traced, we can hit expand up at the top and then ungroup it, and we will be able to edit all of the pixels, not pixels, but vectors individually. And they are handy that way. I think this is the last one, curve fitting. Yeah. So under the advanced tab, I'm actually going to uncheck preview right now. And these settings involve how closely it sticks to my original artwork. So if I hover over this Paths tab or slider, it says Path Fitting, higher value means tighter fit. So if I had this all the way up, it would try to stick to the edge of my lines like exactly the best that it could. And if we go down to 1%, it's going to be a lot more loosey-goosey. And in general, there's a lot less points and vectors when you go to the loosey-goosey side of the artwork. So I'm also going to do the same with corners. So corner emphasis, higher value means more corners. So if it's all the way to the right, then it would try to, again, stay really tight, and it would have as many corners as it needed. Where if we put it all the way to the left, after I check preview or trace, things are going to get a little smoother. There's going to be less corners. It really wasn't that noticeable in the last class, but there's some artworks where it's like a big difference between when we slide these around. I'm also going to raise the noise all the way up. So what this says when I hover over it is that it reduces noise, which is like, you know what noise is in an image. It's like pixels, like random stray pixels and stuff, right? Or snow, I guess. It's when we hover over this, it says it reduces noise by ignoring areas of specified pixel size. So the higher value means less noise. So if I raise this up to 100 pixels, then it is going to ignore all like little random dots that I've made that are less than 100 pixels, okay? There are some other options down here, but these become more relevant if you choose other tracing methods like line art, right? If you had some line art that you had drawn and you wanted it to just instantly be vectors and like have no fills and like just be the paths, line art would be the one to choose. But I normally choose 16 colors and then like adjust my settings from there. Okay, so I'm going to hit trace with these new low settings and we'll see if this looks any smoother to us. So if you guys had your eyes on the board, you might have been able to see it transition to these smoother lines. It's still not perfect, like there's still, you know, chunkiness in places, but it is pretty smooth. And we can just call this done. So I can close my image trace panel. It doesn't really matter anymore because we like how it looks. And then I'm going to hit expand. And expand is going to allow me to see all the vectors. And it's still grouped though. We just have to go to Object, Ungroup. And now we will be able to like select the white background and just delete it, right? So now everything is not on a white background. There's still random whites that were like it considered off-white. Let me move this off the page. So we can get rid of some of those by selecting some of the color and then going to select same fill color. And now it's selecting all of that white. So we should just be able to hit delete and we could keep doing that until we got like all of it, right? So like we don't like that color, so we can go to select same fill color and delete all of that, although that looks like it's mostly in other stuff. But you could also clean these up all individually, which might be better. Like it might be better to take the cat and clean up around the edge of the cat and all that, like one at a time. But let's just try to make our pattern really quick. I chose what garments? I was thinking I would choose this one. So I'm not going to need it in Illustrator, but I'm just going to pop it in here so that I can look at it. I don't need this right now. We do the texture mapping in Photoshop. This is just for reference. So I want to try to make, maybe I'll try to do a gradient where like things change as they go down the rectangle. So I'm going to make my background rectangle for my large scale print. So we can click on the rectangle, and if I just click once with the rectangle, I'm not clicking and dragging, but if I just click once, I can type in some specific numbers. So 36 by 40. So there is our background. Let's choose a background color. And we can start arranging some of these motifs on it. Honestly, this was just kind of like doodling at the time. If I were really trying to design something, it would probably be a lot easier for me to paint like each of these motifs on its own page and scan that, or at least separate them a lot more, because now it's like kind of tricky to get this artwork out of here. So I am going to use the lasso tool to do that. I don't know that we've talked about this in Illustrator, but Illustrator does have a lasso tool. It hides under the direct selection tool, but some of you have like Pro Tools turned on your toolbar, and it might just be there. Sometimes it seems like it's visible. So with the lasso tool, the lasso direct selection tool, I can draw around these shapes and move them, but I have to switch to, if I, if I move them, like if I try to click and drag on them right now, it won't work. So I always switch to the black selection tool and move them. But yes, you can, that does exist. So I'm also going to group these.
I wish you told us that sooner.
Sorry, there's so many things.
I was like, is there some way to grab just like one object without, because like,
Well,
it's hard to draw a square.
Unfortunately, it's also not always that easy. If I try to draw around this cat, I have to make sure that I don't accidentally, like if I accidentally touch this candy and then complete it, now I have some of the pixels from or points from the candy, and when I go to drag it, it distorts the candy. So sometimes it's like not helpful, but it is better than nothing. Yeah, so sorry.
No, it's not bad.
I also do stuff where I will like with the black selection tool, if I want this spell book selected, I would try to I would draw a box around the spell book, and then I would hold shift and I would start like drawing boxes around other stuff that was randomly selected but sometimes that doesn't work like now. Yeah, because he's still selecting some of the cat. Yeah, it's tricky. So we have that piece, and then maybe let's make it all the swirlies. So I'll try to grab these pieces. It seems like I'm just going to need to select that one because it's touching the pumpkin. Maybe I'll delete that piece, but the rest of it I'll be able to draw around. So we'll grab this. Maybe we'll include the bat in there. Oh, I said I didn't want that. So we can switch to the black selection tool and then just hold shift and click on that guy. And let's bring this over to my repeating pattern and we'll group it. And we'll make it really big. So maybe I can try to arrange this so some of the top is these black and white swirls or black and red swirls, and then the bottom are some of these other swirls. I don't think you don't have to go crazy or anything, but let's grab all of these. Okay. Okay. It's almost definitely unnecessary for you to be designing anything but straight repeats for this project. It's not, you don't have to design anything else, but a straight repeat is pretty much all you would need. So maybe I don't really want to spend too much time on this, but maybe I can kind of make these get a little bit smaller as they go up. And those are going to come on the left side, so then we need more room over there. I can always double click on anything that's grouped and then deletes any of the parts you don't need. Double clicking gets you into isolation mode, which is sometimes annoying and sometimes super helpful. So we'll just delete any of these weird overlapping bits, and we will call that's the bottom, and then we will try to get this to fit on the top. Actually, that's going to come on from the other side, like we said. Just double clicking on it to delete the bats. Okay, so we'll have this going off on this side. I obviously could spend a ton more time on this, but I'm just going to make this into a seamless repeat super quick. So we know the width and height of the box is 36 by 40. So these, because it's a straight repeat, get moved 100% of the width across. So they just get moved directly across 36 inches. So we can go Objects, Transform, Move, and we are going to copy them 36 inches. And we can hit copy. And at this point, we don't want to really move any of the stuff that we've copied, but we can still move anything in the center. So if I need to, I can like copy this, and as long as I'm not, you know, touching the edges, it should work just fine. Okay, so I just have to do the bottom really quick here. So edits or object transform move, and we want to go the whole 40 inches up, which is negative, and we can hit copy. So it seems like we didn't need this piece at all, so I'm going to delete it from both sides. As long as you kind of do the same to one side that you do to the other, everything should still be seamless. And let's make our clipping mask. So we can go edit, copy, edit, paste, and back, and make sure it's Ghostbusters. And if we want to be really sure, we can go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back, and then we know it's in the back of the stack, and we can select everything and go to Object, Pattern, Make. So now we have this stripy repeat, and it's okay that it's striped because my intention is that the top of the garment gets this pattern on it, and then it kind of maybe transitions into this pattern as it goes down the dress. So I'm just going to hit done, and we're going to talk about how you would display this for homework. So let me get 2 artboards out, and we will draw a couple rectangles. So you don't need to make colorways, but you do need to show the repeats at a smaller scale. So I have not scaled this at all, and even though we can hardly see any of the repeats, that doesn't matter. We're supposed to be seeing texture and detail in that. In this one, this is the first one, which is normally kind of our main colorway page. For this second one, we can go to Object, Transform, Scale, and on our options here, what do we need to do on the options to get it to scale just the pattern? Exactly. So we can scale this down. I think I went to 25% in the last class, and that's pretty good. I might even go to 15. Yeah, so now we can really see the whole scale of the repeats. So if I were to kind of take these and bring them in here, this one is shown at 100% scale. And it's designed at 36 by 50, by 40. And this one is shown at 15% scale so that we can evaluate the repeat, right? So we can evaluate Are there any birds hiding in the corners? So I know a few of you did have questions about the floral. What if this isn't showing, you know, your whole pattern? And that's fine. That is what this page is for. But also maybe this section could be showing something more interesting. Like maybe it's not your favorite part of the pattern that it's zoomed in on. So we can adjust without adjusting the scale what part of the pattern it's showing by going to Object, Transform, Move, and unchecking Transform Objects. So now we can adjust, and maybe we really only want the bat to be showing. There's the bat. So we can just, we can do that. Maybe we want more. Maybe we want the bat and some of the red and some of the green to show, okay? So that is kind of how I would display this. And what is really going to make this a powerful piece in your portfolio is the texture mapping, which we can get to here in a second. But do you guys have questions on auto tracing, on the scale, on the size? Any questions? Great. So would you like me to review how I made a photorealistic repeating pattern in Photoshop? That lecture from last class is on Moodle. How to make photorealistic patterns. So you can reference that, or I can go over it again really quickly. What do you guys want me to do it? All right. Okay, I'm getting some nods, so I'll do it. It's totally fine. In the last class, I made a really weird, again, I was just like not doing great in the last class. So I'm switching to Photoshop to make a photorealistic pattern. This is the pattern I made last class. It's really wonderful. There's so many ways really to do this, but let's grab a photograph, and again, I'm actually going to let me close some of these. I am going to actually let me think it through here. So with this image, something that I forgot to address before I started the demo last class was that this image is pretty small. It's only 18 inches by 12 inches, and that is probably at 72 pixels per inch, which is the lowest resolution. So if we actually go to the image size and we look at like the number of pixels, it's only 1300 pixels by 800 pixels, and we know that's pretty small. So if I made a new folder, or sorry, a new file that was, you know, the whole 36 by 40, and I, you know, copied and pasted this image into there. I think I made this, so this is at 72 pixels per inch, so it still looks pretty big. But if I adjust this to the 300 pixels per inch that it's supposed to be, 300, and we create that, when we paste these 1200 pixels in here, it looks really, really small. Does it make sense to everyone why this 1200 pixel wide image looks so small on this page? Yeah, because of resolution, right? So we need things to be high resolution so that they print really good. Otherwise, they look blurry. A lot of you have experienced printing out JPEGs at the wrong resolution and them looking blurry. So we need it to be at least at 300 pixels per inch. There's no reason why you can't make this even more than 300 pixels per inch. And weirdly, in the instructions, it actually says you're supposed to make it at 600 pixels per inch, but I just think that finding images that would fit that size is going to be really difficult. So let's try to find images that fill this page. I don't know if it's going to be possible at this scale, but we will choose tools, and we will go to settings and advanced search, and we will try changing this to larger than, we'll try 6 megapixels and hit advanced search. So these should have a ton of pixels in them. This is 7,000 pixels wide. So let's, what happens though is that when they're like that big, if I copy and paste this like I normally do, it's super tiny because it's only the thumbnail and Google isn't allowing you to copy and paste the whole image. So if I want to get this 7,000 pixel image, I have to open it up and download it from the website itself. I don't know if it's going to let me, or if that was kind of a scary click. I don't know. Okay. Let me just try copying this one. I don't know if it's going to work though. Yeah, sometimes it's like not worth it. Yeah, so finding something that fits this whole page would be easy if it were your own photograph taken with like a DSLR camera, right, where you have the backup of all of those pixels. But finding images to make photorealistic things online, it can be quite hard, especially if you need to fill up something that size. So let's try going up even higher. I don't know though.
There's this website called Unsplash.
Unsplash?
Yeah,
Let's try it. Beautiful. That was a great resource there, Allie. Oops. Oh, it has like a dog footprint in it. Look, it's so cute. Okay, so let me delete that other image. And because I brought this in from a file, I can tell is a smart object right now, which means that if I tried to edit it, it would yell at me. So what do we need to do to smart objects? Yes, and what does rasterize mean? Yes, it means to make it into pixels, but the pixels are editable in here because it's Photoshop. So we can choose right-click on it and rasterize layer. Rasterize layer is like the only thing that I don't know how to get to without right-clicking. Everything else I can get to through menus and stuff. But now we would be able to delete it or whatever. And on the assignment, it says that the height has to be at least 40. I feel like I can safely crop these and still fit within the size requirements. So I'm going to crop it in. Although, maybe we should. Let's try to fill it with autofill. So let's leave it at 36 and we'll try to fill it in a different way. So we are going to go to filter other offset in order to reveal the seams of the image, right? Right now, it's not seamless. The top and bottom don't line up perfectly, excuse me. So we can definitely go to filter other offset, and we just need to start adjusting these pixels until we can see the seam. Okay, so we can see that center line, and we want to get it centered, and we also want to be able to see this seam where the two pictures meet, and they don't meet in an appropriate way. Okay, and then we are going to fill this with, we are going to use content aware fill in order to fill it. So let's start with these seams. The most important thing is to not touch the edge pixels. So right now we go all the way up to the edge pixels, but we don't actually select them. And I'm gonna choose kind of this whole center section first. And let's see how it does by going to Edit Fill. So there is a new function called Content Aware Fill, but for most of this work, going to just normal fill is fine, and choosing Content Aware from the normal fill functions options. It just seems simpler to me, but also going to Content Aware Fill would probably work. You just have to merge the extra layer it adds. So it's filling. It's going to take a long time to do any filling because of this super large scale situation that we have going on. So it did okay. There are some moments where I might like it to be better, and I can always like choose little sections again and go to Edit Fill again and just kind of seeing what it does. It might do something different. It might do the exact same thing. But we can also use something called the clone tool in order to kind of fix moments we don't like. So this is the clone tool. It looks like a stamp. And with the clone tool, you have to tell it where you want to copy pixels from by holding Alt and clicking. So now it'll copy pixels from over there. Or maybe we'll choose this one. And we can copy those pixels over here. So we can kind of fudge some of these. So let's choose some of this center work now. I'm not touching the edge pixels. We are going to have to fix this white hole separately in a moment. But for right now, I'm just choosing like as much of the white as possible. And choose Edit Fill. And again, we just want Content Aware Fill to be there. We can hit OK. So, God, I guess this is the benefit of using smaller images for the demo, but I did want to show you the kind of scale of this. It doesn't need to be a texture. I have shown you 2 textures, but if we take a picture of a desert lizard or whatever, we can, we could add this into our pattern. Just, we could cut him out and have him be like a photograph on the image, just like I did for this awkward one that I made, where I cut out the lizard and then I was able to use him as a motif over my texture. So we'll kind of talk about that in a second. So this did fill okay. It's not like the greatest, and I would definitely spend time like using the clone brush tool and fixing some of these moments, right? Like this texture should probably carry over here. It's nice with the clone brush tool when you're getting like a really hard line that you don't want. You can always make the hardness of the brush, softer. You can make the brush softer on the edges, and then it, transitions less. So I would definitely spend more time on this, but let's address how I would fix these white rectangles right now, because if we defined this as a pattern right now, there would be like kind of a big white square in the middle of the pattern. Okay, so we just have to use filter offsets again, and we just need to, not filter offset, but filter other offsets. If you just go to this space up here under filter, the top spot under filter always shows the last filter you used, and it doesn't give you the options for that last filter. It just like applies the same exact filter you used. So you have to go to filter other offset. And now we get this panel, and we can adjust it until that is in the middle of the page. And then we can fill. And as long as we aren't touching the edge pixels, everything will be fine. Everything will stay perfectly seamless. here we go. So I like I said, I don't have to do just a texture. It is easy, especially once you have a seamless repeat. I can kind of get this back so it's centered by, moving these around until it's exactly. So that's showing kind of the main image again, and then I can start. I could bring in, my lizards. I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. I'm like, what am I doing? I wanted like a whole lizard that wasn't going to get cut off in the middle of the image, and all of these. All right, we'll do these squirrels, which is definitely not desert lizards. But, oh, they're so little. Oh, I didn't download it. That's why. Okay, so again, we're just going to have to rasterize the squirrel because I'm bringing it in from a file. I just have to right-click on it and choose rasterize layer, and then I would be able to, select the squirrels, and maybe we'll include their shadows in it. You guys could do a better, more pixel-perfect job of selecting these. I am just trying to go kind of fast here. I'm using the lasso tool, but it's like one of my least favorite tools. I definitely prefer the magnetic lasso tool or the polygonal lasso tool, but I'm trying to go fast. Where I've accidentally included this bit of desert, I can choose Alt and trace around that section, and it will subtract that selection from it. So let's grab this squirrel. Okay. And we will delete the rest of that background. So we have our squirrels. What am I doing? And if we wanted to, we could place a lot of these squirrels on here. Yes. Okay. But right now, if we defined this as a pattern, we would see that, in fact, even though the texture in the background is seamless, these squirrels would be creating a lineup, right? So I'm going to define the pattern and also kind of review how to do that. So we go to Edit, and we choose, or is it Edit? Edit Define Pattern. Yes, Edit Define Pattern. And now this pattern is saved in Photoshop's patterns swatchland. And we can go, I like to go to a new file, but it really shouldn't matter that much. We can just in this layer, in this file, go to Layer, New Fill Layer, and choose Pattern. And we can scale it down so we can see the pattern. Okay, so you can definitely see the lineup in between the squirrels. God. Besides just the color lineup, which is pretty dramatic, honestly, we can see that there is kind of like a gap in here in between the squirrels. So the easiest way to deal with that is to also use filter other offset so that we can see our seams. Seams in this case means kind of just the difference between the squirrels. Even if we turn this off and defined this as a pattern, we would still get that hole. So I'm going to put all these squirrels on the same layer by selecting them all and choosing Merge Layer. Because otherwise I would have to choose Filter Other Offset individually for each layer. So you have to use Filter Other Offset on a single layer, or it's certainly a lot easier if you do. And now I'm going to adjust this until I can see kind of that seam, which I can already see it pretty well in the dead center here. And what I can do is I can either paste in, the squirrels, maybe I saved my motifs as a separate file or whatever. I could paste those in there. Or I could copy and paste these squirrels, or I can just move them, right? So right now I could definitely copy and paste them and put like this other guy up here to fill the hole, or we can just select around them and then switch to the move tool, and because it's selected, it will only move that selection, it won't move the whole layer. Again, you don't want to touch any squirrel that's touching the edge, so I can safely move this squirrel, but I couldn't safely move this squirrel because he would then not be seamless with his tail over here. So if maybe we need one more squirrel in here. Yeah, we'll make this one squirrel upside down. Oh, God. If we get him in there, and now we can turn our texture background back on. I just had it off for convenience. It doesn't really matter. We can choose filter offset again once we have merged these layers. We can choose filter other offset and try to get these back into that kind of original arrangement that I had them, which doesn't look like it's exactly happening. But honestly, anything that we defined right now, no matter where it was on the offset, like everything that we defined would be a seamless pattern. It's just now, like right now, it's about trying to get, the background and the front image looking right on top of each other. But if we just go to Edit, Define Pattern now, we can turn our pattern fill layer back on, and we can double click on the pattern fill little thumbnail right here. And then you can choose your new pattern from this drop-down menu. So now the squirrels are less stripy, ignoring the color stripiness that's happening in the background. Does that make sense? I think I went over that kind of fast. But this is just another way to accomplish repeating patterns. I've only shown you how to make straight repeats in Photoshop because Photoshop is very good at straight repeats, and it's much less good at any half drops or bricks or whatever. So you at this point would be pretty limited to straight repeats in Photoshop, but that's fine, especially for this project. Like the scale of it is so large. So this would definitely be like an interesting project. And then I would probably copy this whole image onto a new 11 by 17 inch file, right? Gotta copy and paste both layers. Where am I? And I'll even merge them for right now. And we would want it to be really, like, this is the scale we would want it to be on the first page. On like the second page, right? Also an 11 by 17. We would want to go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern, and adjust the scale to that 15% that I was talking about in Illustrator, right? So this is what we would want to see on page 2. Okay, so page 1, full scale, we can't even see the face of a squirrel, and page 2 is is small scale. We can adjust this in here, right? So we can find a section that we like. So that squirrel will be my centerpiece. He's angry. Okay, so let's talk about texture mapping. I'm trying to, okay, I think we still have time. So that image I liked so much earlier, I'm going to grab that image. And for your homework, the intention is definitely that this should be large enough that it can be displayed nicely on an 11 by 17 inch page, because it's going to be in your portfolio, so you don't want it to be on like another random size page. You want it to look, you know, seamless. So I'm going to make a new 11 by 17 inch page. And let's see how she looks in there. So she's kind of small. I really like that dress though, so I'm going to use it. I don't think she's too, I feel like this size is fine as long as she's like filling up a good chunk of the page. She shouldn't be like, you know, she shouldn't be this small on an 11 by 17 inch page. But I think this scale is fine. I'm not even going to remove the background from this image. I'm just adding layers to it so that it's going to look like my pattern is on her garments. So there's so many different ways to do texture mapping, but I'm going to teach you with a layer that I call a color blocked layer. So I'm going to name that layer color block, and with my selection tools, I'm going to carefully select around the dress, and on the color block layer, we are going to fill each section of the dress with different colors. And these are not the final colors that we're going to use, but they are going to allow us to select things more easily. So again, you guys can do a more pixel perfect job of selecting, but I'm just going to do my best here and select kind of around her garments. And I think at first, like the first step is generally to trace the whole garments, in my opinion. That's the easiest first step. So I will trace around the whole. The whole dress. I accidentally double clicked and it closed my selection, so I'm just holding shift and I will add this to the selection that's already been closed. Almost there now. So seeing your image, your patterns texture mapped is so satisfying. It really is a nice culmination to a project to put it onto a dress. So now I have it selected. I am going to grab my paint bucket tool, which as a reminder lives under the gradient tool, so you might have to click and hold on the gradient tool to get to the paint bucket tool. And on a new layer, I'm going to fill it with a solid color. If I don't choose a new layer and I hit fill, it's going to fill wrong. So if you see this happening, you just have to be on your own layer, right? Because otherwise also you're damaging these JPEGs if you accidentally leave that there. So we're looking we're looking to get this color block layer with a different color on each section. So I'm going to make it semi-transparent. And what's great about the color block layer is that if we deselect, we can just grab the magic wand tool, and as long as we're on this layer, we can instantly select the section that we need. So now that I have this selected, I am actually going to grab my polygonal tool, and I'm going to hit Alt, and this is going to subtract everything from the selection. So I actually just want the sleeve left, so I'm going to hold Alt and click along her inside sleeve, and then I can choose around the rest of the garment to subtract that area. I accidentally left that little area. Oops. Alt. Or I guess it's Option on some of yours. So we have that selected now, just her one sleeve, and what we want to do is, again, on the color block layer, with our paint bucket tool, we're going to choose a new individual color and fill it. These, I want to be clear, they are not the colors that the garment is going to be in the end. This is just for selection, so these colors can be, wild and clashing, and it won't matter at all. So same thing here. I'm going to choose Alt, and this time I'm going to try to get just the bodice. So you can click along here and along here. And fill this with its own layer, its own color, on that same layer. It's easiest if all of your separate colors are on the same layer. So again, I'm just grabbing my magic wand tool and selecting that the blue section that's still there. And the last little section here is this sleeve or the skirt, either one. So I will just remove the sleeve from the selection and fill the skirt with a different color. Maybe an even more different color. So this color block layer is just to allow us to select these different sections easily. I really like to do it beforehand because sometimes I like to have these able to be selected and filled this way because it takes a damn lot of work to select around an image, right? It's not super easy. I mean, it's not the hardest thing in the world either, but it takes time. And for you to select all the way around and then, accidentally deselect or realize that you need to do another step beforehand, this is solving all of that image, so all of those problems. So we can just instantly select all of these different areas. It's kind of like having your selections saved. Except that you can actually save selections. If I have this selected, I can go to Select, Save Selection. But I think just for straightforwardness, visually, this makes the most sense to me, how we're selecting these different sections of the body. Does this make sense? Okay, so let's get my artwork in here. I am going to go back to Illustrator and my new one that I made. It's not totally necessary to bring in I could technically bring this in and define it as a pattern in Photoshop, and then make a pattern that way. And I'll go over how to do that. But I think for today, it's easiest just to take this image. So I'm going to actually just copy and paste this image into Photoshop, and it does allow you to do that. But when you paste, you just need to tell it to paste as pixels and not as paths, which would kind of reserve all of that information from Photoshop, or from Illustrator, which you don't need anymore. So we're pasting it as pixels. And what I kind of want to make sure is that this is the right scale for this dress, and I think it's good. What I could do is in Illustrator, I could scale this bigger or smaller if I did need it to be, a little bit bigger. I could do that, and then I could copy and paste it in. But I think it's a good scale in here, and we are going to start applying these textures to the image. One more thing on the color blocking layer. If I were trying to be really like effective with this, I would probably also have color blocked out some of these fullness lines. So I might have color blocked this out, right? Because what we're doing with the color blocking is we're making sure that the pattern isn't just going to be seamless across, right? We could, you know, just do this to a pattern, right? And we could call that a day. But with doing this color blocking, we are going to make sure that each of these sections look like it's actually been cut out of fabric and put onto the body. So there would be breaks in the pattern in between these different sections because they would have been cut out of the fabric in different sections. So let's focus on the top first. I said I wanted the top to be the red and black section of the garment. So I am going to copy and paste a section of this pattern that is bigger than my bodice. So I need it to be about this big, but if it's like super big, it gets kind of unwieldy. You can definitely use big images, but anyway, we are just going to use this little section. So I will copy and paste that. Okay, pasted as. Oh, why? Okay, that time it did it. I don't know why that happened before. So we just need a little section of the red and copy and paste. Okay, so now we just have this little section, and I'm going to get it placed on the top of the bodice. And once I like the placement, okay, I need to select my bodice. Right now, if I grab the magic wand tool and click on it, it's actually going to select, you know, all of the pixels from the layer that I'm on. So I need to be on the color block layer, have that selected. And then when we move back to layer 3, I'm going to use this clipping mask function, which is in the layer panel, and it's at the bottom of the layer panel, and this function looks like looks like the Japanese flag. It's got like a circle in the center of a rectangle. So when we click on this with a selection, it's going to clip it to the edge of the selection. And you can see that already looks, you know, it's already looking good, except, well, I just don't know. There's a few things I can do. I can still edit this. The benefit of making it this way instead of the way we might be more familiar with, right? Like we could just select the bodice and then choose select inverse and delete the backgrounds, okay? And those would look pretty much the same as, you know, this versus this, except in the layer where I use the clipping mask, you pretty much always want to use clipping masks for texture mapping because you can edit the picture afterwards. So all I have to do is unlink this, this image from its clipping mask. And then I have to make sure that the image is selected. If I have the clipping mask selected and I try to move, it'll move the clipping mask. So I have to make sure I have the image thumbnail selected, and then I can still adjust this, this garment or this pattern in here. And we can also go to Edit, Transform, Warp, and we can try to make this pattern look like it's wrapping around the body. This wrapping technique is really handy, but it's most important for fabrics that have lines in them, like plaids and things where the image has to like curve around the body to look convincing. We can try to make this look more convincing, but because this isn't like a super repetitive pattern, it might not read that well. But basically, when I use the warp tool after I've done texture mapping, I try to get the left and the right side of the image to be closer together to try to imitate how, as the fabric wraps around the body, the motifs would distort. Okay, so we can hit enter, and of course right now it's still red and weird, but we are gonna fix that in a minute. But let's do all of our other patterns. So with my pattern layer, this time I want a piece that's about the size of the skirt. So I am going to kind of select around the skirt and then adjust it so that it sits mostly on this green area, and I'm going to copy and paste that green area. And we'll try to get this centered. Maybe it has some flames coming in from the bottom, but it's like mostly supposed to be the green. So we can, then we have to use the layer mask to clip it to this size, or the clipping mask. I've called it both, but I think it's technically called a layer mask in Photoshop. We just need to have the skirt selected. So I have my magic wand tool, which selects everything of the same color. And we can click on the skirt, and then we have to go back to our original layer and apply the clipping mask. And right now, if I tried to warp it or if I tried to move it, it will move the whole skirt, right? It will move the whole like clipping mask and everything, right? If I try to warp it, it moves the edge of the clipping mask. So we have to unlink it down here. Right, so right now they're linked together. We've got to unlink it, and then we can move this as much as we want, and we can go to Edit, Transform, Warp. So we can try, again, we can try our best to kind of adjust this so that the edges kind of get closer together and the center stays kind of large and far apart. Warping these center lines also helps with kind of that feeling of three-dimensionality, but a lot of it is just making sure that the edges, the like motifs on the edges get a little bit tighter and like a little bit closer together than the center pieces. We'll address the folds in this skirt in a second, but let's do the sleeves. So we need like pretty small pieces for the sleeves, and we can, I don't think I'm going to bother warping the sleeves very much, so I'm going to choose a piece that's actually big enough for both of them, and maybe I want it to be kind of this small green texture. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste from this layer, and then we will get it in the right spots. I'm switching to my color block layer and selecting my color blocked areas with my magic wand tool. And then we just make a clipping mask using this Japanese flag symbol down there. So now we have all different sections, and you can see that they don't seamlessly line up across the different sections, which is leading to kind of a more realistic feeling. But it's still color blocked, so let's shut off that color block layer. And that's weird. I don't know why it has this white line. I hate that. Oh well. We can't see the dress through this right now, and it's just a really handy thing to be able to use these opacity settings, right? So last time we talked about these last class, I think. We can change just the opacity, which makes the transparency different, or we can go to the opacity settings, which are just to the left of the word opacity here, and they normally say normal at first. And I can't say like always use multiply for texture mapping, or like always use, you know, color burn or whatever, because different color combinations are going to be affected differently by these multiply settings, or by these opacity settings. But some of these work really well. Actually, multiply looks really good. And just scrolling through them all, you can kind of get a feel for what you want. Right? None of these are quite right. So I do like to kind of scroll through them all and then choose my favorite. So I'm going to choose linear burn, I guess. Normally I end up choosing like multiply, one of those. And we have this was supposed to be successfully texture mapped, except for this annoying line that I accidentally left. I wonder, that's so weird. Why? The way that I built this, there really shouldn't have been any pixels left over, because I was like using this. Oh, this had anti-aliasing on. Damn. So that was like adding a weird pixel in between my layers, and so it prevented me from picking up every single pixel. So if we like turn all these other layers off and we just look at my texture mapping layer, that was added because this had anti-aliasing on. So when I then went with my magic wand tool to select it, it leaves all those pixels behind the damn thing. So just turn off anti-aliasing. Or I could maybe have raised my tolerance to like, you know, 50 or 100 or something, and then it would pick up more of those pixels, but it's still not. I'm sorry, anti-aliasing is so lame. Now it's selecting everything but those pixels. Okay. So besides that annoying line, this is a pretty successfully texture mapped image. Sometimes it will feel like your darks in your darks aren't dark enough, like the shadows aren't showing through, and we can add contrast to the dress in order to see the darks come through a little bit more. So if I select everything but the dress, or if I select the dress, yeah. So I just have the dress selected, and I'm going to copy and paste it. So now we have a layer of just the dress. I am going to add an adjustment layer to this document of brightness / contrast. And right now, this brightness and contrast layer is affecting everything that's below it in this stack of layers. So it's still affecting this girl's skin and the background, even though I only want it to affect the dress. Does anyone remember how you get this adjustment layer to apply to only the layer below it? I know, I've only talked about it like once, maybe twice. Anyone? Do you have a guess, even if you don't know it, sure? The last class had like 6 guesses, and it was really funny. They were like naming all of these tools. So, I mean, one option is to merge these layers, right? Once we merge them, it's only going to apply this to the layer that it was merged with. But we maybe want to be able to adjust this again until we think it looks right. So instead of merging them, we are going to use this little symbol. So it looks like a square with like the down arrow next to it. And this means that it will affect only the layer below it. So now it's only applying to layer 6. And if we like moved around layer 6, we could see it. Right, so she's a lot darker than the original dress, or a bit darker anyway. And that is just hopefully allowing more of the shadows to come through. It wasn't too much of an issue on mine, like I could still see a ton of shadows, but in case you wanted something like that, it's nice to be able to like darken it up to get more shadows, or up the contrast to get like more brights and shadows in there. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the liquefy filter. It's a lot of talking. So for this dress where there's so much movement in it, it doesn't look super realistic how this kind of doesn't seem to, the pattern doesn't seem to adjust too much for this fullness. So we are going to choose this option, this layer, and go to filter and choose liquefy. And it no longer shows me my clipping mask, but I can, in my options over here, check off show backdrop. And as long as it is, as long as you don't have the opacity all the way up, it allows you to see the backdrop and this image that we're going to be liquefying at the same time. Let me uncheck that and show you what liquefy does. There's all sorts of tools over here, but the main tool is the forward warp tool that I was going to be talking about anyway. And you can adjust the size and the pressure of this tool over on the right. And when we click and drag with it, it warps everything. A lot like how the, I don't know if you guys have ever played with the blend tool in normal Photoshop land, but this keeps things pixely not blurry. The blend tool blurs things. So you can adjust it like that. So let's get the backdrop on there, and things can get super visually confusing on this page, but if you just kind of focus in on what you need, like we might not even need to show all the layers, we might just need the garment layer, right, or even just the dress layer. So now we can kind of focus in on this, and right now, when I click and drag with this, it does too much. We want it to do a lot less, so I'm going to lower the pressure like a lot. I just want these to like kind of look like they're moving forward. And maybe I even need a larger brush. And actually, I might have been adjusting those the wrong way. Raise the size. That's too big, too big. Okay. So like for this one, maybe these would get pushed over to the side so they look more like they are wrapping around that arch. This isn't the best example because I probably would have put this on its own layer with its own little pattern, but you can warp to get things really exact. I didn't even show this tool to the last class. I totally forgot about it, and they all made beautiful texture mapping without the liquefy tool. So it's definitely something that you can use, but it's not like a requirement to make a nice texture mapping, right? Okay, so I don't know how much better that really looks, but you can use the liquefy tool. Okay, questions on texture mapping. We're going to do this as an in-class activity after the crit. You're going to find a dress and you are going to apply one of your old patterns to it. So hopefully you have an Illustrator file available or one of your saved JPEGs or whatever to bring into a Photoshop file. And it's so fun to see your patterns on garments. So it's a fun in-class activity we're going to do after the crit. This was a really long lecture today, so we will take a break until, what is it, 4:20? 4:20. 4:20, all right, get out of here.